Well, good evening, folks. I'm Joe Davis. I'm coming to you from Austin, Texas. I'm the head of developer education for our Play Policy department at Google Play. Thank you for tuning in today. Today we'll cover how to protect users and developers on the Google Play Store. This includes an overview of policies that guide the development and distribution of Android apps and games. So again, thank you for tuning in. You can subscribe to this Digital Days YouTube channel and turn on alerts. Let's go a bit over the agenda for tonight. First, we'll talk a little bit more about the trust and safety principles that guide our policies and processes, specifically on Google Play for apps and games that are distributed on the store. Then we'll look at a little bit about how you can consider policy as an app and game developer throughout the app development lifecycle, from design to development through distribution and maintenance. Then we took a look at some of the top policy violations and trends in the Middle East and North Africa region, and have provided some specific tips for you all on how you can prevent these types of violations in the future. And then we'll review some recent enhancements to our Play policies and tools that we've made more specifically over the past few months. Then we'll take a look at our Play policy resources that are available for on-demand consumption. This could be training, documentation, and help center content. So first I want to talk a bit about what does trust mean to you all. And part of my background, actually before working at Google, I've been at Google for over 6 years now, was actually in retail stores. I worked in the corporate headquarters of two large global retail organizations. And I sort of see similarities between our online store and a brick and mortar retail store. If you were to think about walking into a physical store, do you inherently trust that that store has the processes and procedures in place to ensure a certain level of quality of items in that store and safety precautions that were made when producing the items that are for sale? So let's say you're in Dubai supermarket and you purchased some yogurt and you found a piece of glass in it. That's not very good. That's pretty alarming. How would that make you feel? How did that impact your future buying decisions from that store? You know, how was your trust broken with not only the supplier or manufacturer of the item, but also your perception of the supermarket that sold you that good that was defective and actually dangerous? So we take sort of a similar concept through our policies, and that is at their core why they exist in the apps and games that are sold digitally. So this is really one of our guiding principles around trust and safety. And so we're always striving to put the user first, whether they're children, adults, corporate users, keeping in mind that without user trust, we would not be able to have the thriving platform to begin with. And you can sort of see the analogy that I provided in the previous slide. People would stop going to your store in general if they felt it was unsafe or sold unsafe goods. So we want consumers to trust the apps that are downloaded from the Play Store, and we want developers to have a great experience sharing their apps through Play. And that's one that's easy to navigate, clear on requirements, and fair for everyone involved. So how do we do this? We do this through a combination of automated systems and human review. There is a myth out there that it is just systems that are taking down apps. There are processes and procedures in place where we actually have a team of 1,000, 1,500 plus reviewers that are actually opening the app. They're going through its contents, and they're experiencing your in-app experience and comparing it to the store listing that you provided and seeing if is it consistent? Does it violate anything that is inconsistent or any of our content policies? Is it requesting permissions that don't make sense or that haven't been declared? So there is a number of experts. These can be from the reviewers that I just talked about, from data scientists to engineers or subject matter experts in that industry, all working together to actually inform some of the automated systems as well. So this is a combination of many vectors and systems to proactively approach and identify both emerging threats, but also enforce our current policies and procedures today. And these policies are not frozen in time. They continue to evolve as we see the marketplace evolve and as trends become visible within the developer and user communities. So when we introduce new policies or changes, which as you've seen happens maybe 4 to 6 times a year, it's always with the interests of our users first. And often people ask, well, how do we decide how to change these policies? I can tell you we're listening to users and prioritizing their strongest feedback. We're looking at those trends. We're listening to developers, and we're committed to keeping you informed of these changes. And we'll talk a bit more about those communication channels and how we've increased transparency and tried to provide a lot more details than we historically have in the past on what those changes mean, how they're enforced and when, as well as examples of what it looks like to be compliant or non-compliant with those changes. So a lot of work the team has done to provide that type of additional clarity. Let's look at a broad overview of our play policy categories. There's 10 of them. The first one is restricted content. This captures most of our policies that deal with illegal, restricted, or highly regulated content. This could be anything from violence and hate speech, terrorism, organization type content, gambling, sexual content. There's also a section carved out for user-generated content and how it's governed, and reporting systems in place if your app has content that is generated from users and not from you. The second category is impersonation, which is coupled a little bit with intellectual property or IP. As the name suggests, these are policies that govern intellectual property such as copyright infringement or counterfeit goods. Impersonation could be using someone else's brand or content without permission or without the rights to do so. We'll talk later in the presentation about how to show Google documentation that you actually have rights to use something before it goes for review. So you don't have to submit it and then get a violation against IP or impersonation after submission. We have a privacy, deception, and device abuse category. This covers a broad set of policies from user data and permissions to deceptive behavior like misleading claims or dangerous downloads. The main theme here is about protecting user privacy and providing a secure environment for users and their data, particularly data that is classified as sensitive. Monetization and ads. This is where we talk about how our ads displayed. We'll walk you through poor ad practices that create bad user experiences. And we'll talk about this is also the category that houses our payments and subscription policies. Our store listing. So this is as you're filling out the store listing and promotional content on Play Console that will actually get surfaced and merchandised on the Google Play Store. We have guidance on what poor practices are there and what could be almost categorized as spammy behavior in your metadata or store listing and how to avoid that. Families governs our apps that are obviously designed for children and are a form that has you fill out the target age group of your app. Even if it's not just designed for families, a target age group would be filled out, and we'll cover more about that later. Then there's spam and minimum functionality. This talks about the basic degree of functionality and a respectful user experience that apps should provide to users. And we've identified poor practices to avoid, so your app is meaningful and is providing value to users. Malware is any code that puts a user, their data, or device at risk. Framework modifications, Trojans, phishing, spyware apps. We're continuously looking and updating this category of security and system vulnerabilities and making sure that the policy and practices are able to catch those vulnerabilities and bad actors. And then mobile unwanted software. So this is, Google has an unwanted software as a company, and we at Play have a specific mobile unwanted software that's informed by those larger principles. And this is software that violates the principles that are harmful to the users, and users expect that we take action to protect them from that. So let's look at how policies can be considered through the app development lifecycle. So first, let's look at the design. As you're going through your app design, consult with the policy center. This is a pretty obvious choice. Become familiar with those 10 categories, making sure that in their design, you're compliant and it's consistent with what a compliant app experience would look like in the design. That way you're not going down the design and development process and then figuring out later when you submit it, oh, I'm not sure if we can do that. Catch that earlier in the design and requirements phase. So this first talks about, number one is the content appropriate, no hate speech, nothing that crosses a line of those content policies. It meets our spam and minimum functionality requirements. And again, if you have the rights to use the content, going to copyright and intellectual property policies. Then developing with policy in mind, request the permissions that relate directly to the app's features. Don't request anything more than you don't need. We'll cover more but later how to kind of put that into practice. And this policy obviously covers how ads are served, what they contain, and how they behave. So those would need to be consistent with the monetization and ads policies. And then, so you've developed the app, you're ready to list it. We want, obviously, your app and game to be best representing its content and not be deceptive. So there's some best practices in place even beyond policy that you can learn likely later this week on how to sort of best capture that value and represent it accurately to your users. You'll also fill out a content rating questionnaire. This is administered by a third-party international age rating coalition, or IARC, which spits out a bunch of content ratings that are locally relevant to the apps and countries that your app is distributed to. And you'll fill out a target audience and content section as well in the families policy, or governed by the families policy. Then you've submitted your store listing. Well, then your app is reviewed. Someone will take a look at your app, or through either a combination of human review or, again, machine learning and automated systems to flag and remove something that's potentially harmful. We'll let you know via email and through the Play console if a policy violation is found, along with any action required. We made some enhancements to this process, and we'll go through those enhancements that were made back in July. And then, obviously, this is the best part. Your app is distributed through Google Play. So again, you're not completely done. Again, as I mentioned, policies evolve over time. 4 to 6 times a year, maybe more or less. You want to stay informed on those policy updates. And for user protection, apps may be periodically re-reviewed over time as well. So keep your contact information current in the Google Play console. So there are different enforcement outcomes or review outcomes that can be assigned after an app is reviewed. Published is by far the most folks will just have it approved and published. You're good to go there. A rejection, kind of a common policy violation that is consistent with a rejection action, could be metadata spam. This can be accidental, and so we realize accidents happen. So no strike is issued against the good standing of a developer account against a rejection action. Removed is sort of a consistent action. There is maybe it was removed for a family's violation. Something that we've seen is, let's just say your app is designed for families and a specific audience that attracts children, but then you have adult content present in the app. Let's just say it served a gambling ad or had some inappropriate dating content that is not consistent with content that should be served with that age group. So that is consistent with web removal. Suspended, this could be an example of malware. It counts as a strike against the Google Play developer account. The same APK, the original APK cannot be used to resubmit if it was suspended, because in the example with malware, the malware needs to be removed. And terminated, this could happen as a result of multiple egregious violations, could result in the developer account being terminated. If you follow these best practices, you can proactively become familiar with some of our policies using our resources. You can avoid these types of scenarios. So let's take a look at some top policies to highlight, specifically in the Middle East and North Africa region. And we'll show a couple of videos. They're about a minute long, 2 videos. The first policy section or category was around our store listing and promotion, specifically metadata violations. We'll cover what to do and not do, as well as that content rating questionnaire. We don't distribute that rating. It's facilitated by the IARC organization, but we'll talk about how to you can fill that out in a way that's consistent. And then we'll talk about permissions and user data, which is consistent with our privacy, deception, and device abuse policy. So let's take a look at this video, which covers our store listing and promotion.
We want users to trust the apps and games they download from Google Play. descriptions of the app's functionality and content. Develop.
Hey folks, sorry about that. Anyways, I think I accidentally X'd out of the wrong window there, but hopefully you have me back. You can watch the full video. We've actually made it in Arabic as well on the Digital Days YouTube channel. So take a look at that potentially after the webinar, and that video will be available. Let's jump right back into what you can avoid in a metadata to avoid a sort of a metadata violation in your store listing. So what to avoid: excessive details about the app. These are things that just add content to clutter up the store listing without sort of synthesizing what is the best value that is bringing to the user and why they should download it. Also, unattributed user testimonials. You can see, like on the number one on the right here, my favorite pet app. I found my new best friend here. These are all Rescue Rover user anonymous. These cannot be attributed to anyone, and this is to avoid folks just sort of making up testimonials. So you want to avoid that. You'll want to avoid misleading references to other apps. Like number two here, it says 50% cooler or 100% faster. That could be misleading and may not be able to be verified. And then repetitive, excessive, or irrelevant keywords. So as you see, number three, these are just big blocks of text or just random keywords that were added that may not be congruent or consistent and may cause confusion, or just only serving from a SEO perspective. So you know, let's cover what you could do. I think highlighting what's great about your app. Share something interesting and exciting that makes it special and why it's different than other apps on the store. Ensuring your title and description accurately describe your app, and avoid, again, using those repetitive or unrelated keywords, and keeping your description succinct and straightforward. Shorter descriptions result in a better user experience. And avoid using text, images, or videos that are not suitable for a general audience. Okay, so let's jump into the IARC content rating. So our content rating system includes official ratings that are generated from the IARC organization, and they're designed to help developers communicate locally relevant content ratings to users. Content ratings are used to inform consumers of potentially objectionable content within an app, and they also help filter or block out your content in certain territories or to specific users where required by law, and determine your app's eligibility for special developer programs. So I think sometimes we see, most often, content ratings when you submit an update to your app. Potentially content in that app has been changed in a way that it impacts the content rating question. So one thing, again, as we kind of go back to incorporating best practices in your app development lifecycle, when you prepare for a release, you may want to have some sort of process where it's like, okay, we made a change to our content. Let's take a look at the content rating questionnaire to see if our answers may have changed based on the new content in the app. How is this different than the target audience section? Well, the target audience questionnaire is actually governed in the Play Console by Google as it relates to our families policy. So you'll notice here, if you're targeting all age groups or a specific age group, you would be able to deselect or select the audiences there. So that's the difference between these two things. And how are they different to the user? Well, you'll notice the IARC rating is actually that rating that is different based on your region. So for example, this app has a USE for everyone rating, but then this children's app is specifically designed for people 5 and under. So they only selected this 5 and under category, or age range, and that is being displayed consistently on the store listing through that tile there on the right. So that's how these are different. And finally, let's look at permissions and user data. I'm not going to play a video because last time that didn't go well, but these videos will be available in the resources section that I cover. So let's take a note about privacy and permissions. We want Google Play to be a platform, obviously, where your apps can offer a highly personalized experience to users and make their lives simpler and easier and helpful. But at the same time, privacy is paramount. Users want more transparency and control in terms of how their personal and device data is accessed by apps. Prominent disclosures are critical as it relates to permissions and user data, and your app will not be approved if these disclosures are not clear to the user. So you must clearly explain how you intend to deal with the user data, that is data obtained from the user or information relevant to the user or their device, and you must publicly disclose the method of that data collection, usage, and sharing. So data can only be used for the purposes specified in the public disclosure, and you must obtain the user's permission. So this is through an in-app disclosure statement to explain the data collection and usage methods. So you can see on the right there, that is an example of before the permission is called, it says parking app collects location data to identify nearby parking spots even when the app is closed. So this is a use case for background location, which is now has a recent policy change that I'll talk about, and it's asking for the user to allow parking app to access this device location, and then it says this gives the parking app the ability to look for nearby parking spots even when the app is closed. So we have more resources coming on these prominent disclosures, but this is not only a best practice, it is a policy requirement. So when we look at how should we build privacy-friendly apps, first type of thing is just be familiar with the types of user and device data that your apps are calling for. Oftentimes, this can be a third-party library or SDK that is calling for the data, and being really familiar with those SDKs and third-party libraries before integrating them into the app. So when we look at kind of a couple questions that we can ask ourselves. First one is, do we really need it? This could be around tracking user behavior. If you request to collect a certain piece of information from a user, from their device, ask, do you need it? An example of this is asking for hardware identifiers from the user, such as their device IMEI number for user unique identification. Asking for a list of installed apps to fingerprint a user, using the location when the app opens, asking for the cellular network, such as the name of the network or its strength. Are these critical in understanding and providing a great experience to the user? Why do we need some of these pieces of data? So really ask yourself, do we need it? The second one is there an alternative? So using privacy-friendly alternatives when one is possible. So this could be course location versus fine location, instance ID or Google Ad ID instead of an IMEI device number to fingerprint a user. And does the user know about it? If users do not expect that their personal or sensitive data will be used, again, we're going back to those prominent disclosures to ensure that they're aware of the data that you're accessing for what purpose. And this is actually impacting user behavior. The majority of decisions users make around allowing app permissions are linked to its functionality. Users are more willing to grant permissions when the reason is clear. Out of a Google study at an academic conference, 49%, almost half of users, participants, denied permissions to an app once simply because they thought the app shouldn't have it. 15% uninstalled apps solely due to it asking for permissions when they didn't understand why or felt that those permissions were not required. So developers should ensure they deliver a comprehensive explanation of why it's required and only request, obviously, the permissions that materially impacts the user and their experience. So let's now take a look at some recent enhancements to POI policies and processes and tools. Back in July, we, based on your feedback, we've enhanced the majority of our policy enforcement emails with more details about the policy violation that we found specifically in your app. This may include a unique screenshot from your in-app experience or a text excerpt from the store listing that we found the violation, and or additional statements about the violating behavior to support the specific action taken, along with guidance to correct the issue. We think, we've gotten a lot of developer feedback that the enforcement emails need this level of specificity to take specific action, and we're happy to be able to now include this type of information in these emails, specifically customized with the app review. We've also updated our policy center. So this has been re-platformed into the Google Play Console Help Center to sort of create a one-stop shop across Play Console Help and the Policy Center. We're also utilizing the power of that help support platform. And we've streamlined and simplified a lot of our policy language back in July and added a ton of more screenshots, including examples of compliant and non-compliant examples to accompany the policy language, including GIFs like this that show, what is an example of, say, a disruptive ad, and how can we avoid that. So you can find these at play.google.com/policy. Click on any of the app policy categories and you'll be directed to this new page. We've also, since I think November of last year, started to do policy bite videos. Unfortunately, they feature me, so you have to deal with more of me talking with you. But what we do is sort of impact every time a policy update is made. We have a accompanying video for major updates. Sometimes there may be a very small update that impacts very few developers. But when it's a broader update, we will publish a video and localized in 9 languages, I believe, to walk developers through these changes, and usually just a bullet point of updates. We'll talk more about it. We'll have additional screenshots. And we also have 10 explainer videos to kind of capture the essence and principles of our new policies, or policy categories rather. So for example, in our last Policy Bites video, we unpacked each policy one by one and actually showed screenshot examples of compliant and non-compliant screenshots. So Subscribe to the Android Developers channel, goo.gle/Android devs on YouTube to be up to date on those videos that come out. And we've also made some policy and compliance related enhancements in Google Play Console Beta right now. Soon, or actually now, Play Console Beta includes an inbox feature, which will distribute all policy updates that are pertinent to your specific app. It will also include the original email as well. So there's a button to view the email and not only just see, oh, it was rejected, but why was it rejected, and then would include those screenshots or descriptive text so you can take action. This is under the policy status section, or this is a policy status menu under the policy and compliance category of the apps dashboard. So try out these new features on the Google Play Console by joining the beta, play.google.com/console. Tom Grinstead tomorrow will be presenting on Google Play Console a bit more. And so tune in to around the same time tomorrow to learn more about these enhancements on policy, but also just generally on the console platform. And then to wrap up, we have our Play Policy resources. So a lot of questions on sometimes we always don't get it right in terms of a policy decision. So if you want to appeal a policy decision, or we believe that we made that an error, please reach out to the policy support team in that email or in that inbox message on console and follow the steps right there. Make sure to explain the reason thoroughly and submit relevant documentation for an accelerated review. That is, if it was a violation around not being able to use the content in your app in terms of having rights, make sure you have the documentation that demonstrate that, etc. Do not submit duplicate appeals. This will slow down the process and creates confusion in multiple cases, and really just creating the one case will optimize efficiency to making sure that the appeal is processed in a timely manner. We talked a bit about how can we actually provide advance notice to Play before you submit. This could be through multitude of different scenarios, IP and other things. You can go to g.co/play/advance notice and fill out the form on that site before you submit your app for review. We've also tripled the amount of content that we offer on our Google Play Academy, tripled the amount of policy content specifically. And you can find free training on Google Play Policy on the Play Academy at g.co/Play Academy/policy. So if I were to leave, two resources that are super important, be the Developer Center, obviously, Play Developer Policy Center, but then also the Play Academy policy learning path as well. And so that sort of wraps up this portion of my presentation. You can also fill out the feedback as well on this slide or on the URLs on this slide. But I believe we have time for just a couple of questions. So.
Hey, Joe, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so first, thank you for joining us at the MENA Digital Day. It's really nice for the team from the Google Play to come and present to us in our region the issues that you see, the most common problems. I have assembled like 3 questions. The first question is, you talked about rejection. And a common question in the region is, if I'm a developer and I get rejected, my app gets rejected, does that count as a strike against me, against my company?
That's a good question. No. So again, we understand the majority of, or we understand that a rejection, sometimes mistakes happen, sometimes it's not intentional to violate, say, a metadata spam violation in your store listing. So that does not count against the good standing of a developer account.
Okay, thank you. So, like, I have like a couple of startups that sometimes they tell me that they don't receive all the emails with regard to the policy update. Is there a way for us to sign up to the notices and make sure that my developer gets notice?
So I think this has been a popular question before Google Play Console beta inbox feature was released, and you'll learn more about that tomorrow with Tom Grinstead at that webinar. But two best practices, I would say. Number one, make sure your developer account email is up to date. Oftentimes what we would see is the developer account would be developed by someone, and then that person left the company, and so then emails were going to an address that was not active anymore, or whatever, just something silly like that. A best practice for a large company might be create an email alias and put that alias as the developer account. So then the primary, is being distributed to multiple people that need to see those notices, but also as an additional kind of way to get those communications out. The Google Play Console now has this inbox feature where you can see those notices right in the tool and not have to rely on missing an email or not. So keep your email up to date, but also check the new inbox feature, which you'll learn about tomorrow.
Thank you, Joe. I want to reiterate your recommendation of having a generic email and not an individual developer email, because you know how it is, people change and then all the information is gone. So having a generic email for those official communication notices is very, very critical for a startup. The last question, I believe you announced like a new policy related to the background location. I know a lot of people have been asking us about Google Maps, about location, about they have use cases.
Yes.
Is there a way for them to submit those use cases?
It's a great question. So we are taking a phased approach on this. Earlier this year, couple months ago, we announced the background location policy, which you can find on the Policy Center. The declaration forms, if you believe that your app meets the policy requirements of the use of the background location permission, you can submit that app declaration form and submit your use case on Google Play Console beginning September 30th, so just in a few weeks. So we'll have more information on where that appears. I'm also launching a video at the end of the month on the Android Developers channel on in-app disclosure notifications and permissions. So we'll have more stuff coming, but expect by the end of the month to get more specific information on how to move forward with that policy.
Great. Thank you very much, Joe. As Joe mentioned, tomorrow and the next 3 days, we are going to have more of Googlers coming and telling us about Google Console, telling us about Android 11. So we encourage you to attend the next 3 days at 9 p.m. Dubai time, and then on Wednesday at 8 p.m. and then Thursday 9 p.m. Thank you again, Joe. Any last comment or advice for the developer in the region?
No, I would just say we really appreciate your guys' partnership, and I'm looking to grow my support of the region. And we know that this is a partnership, a balance between users, developers, advertisers to make this work. And we know we sometimes ask a lot, and it's always in the spirit of trust and safety, to my earlier point, and making sure that we can keep users safe and protect them So thank you again. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone today, and have a great night.
Thank you very much, Joe, and to all of the developers who are listening. Don't forget, please, to complete the feedback and send us more feedback that we can share with the Google Play team and the Googlers as well. Thank you very much, and have a good night.
Thank you.